Now we move on to one of the most used functions that we're going to be using throughout the course. And what we're going to be doing is learning about if statements. Now, if statements are an essential part to application development. They allow you to detect the current state of an object and perform an action upon it. For example, if something is this, then do this. Else, if it's not like this, then do something else. So it can sound a little bit confusing, and how we're going to demonstrate it is with labels and text and UI text fields. So we're going to jump into our main.storyboard, where we're first going to configure our interface to perform the function before we can move on to using our if statements. So basically what we're going to be doing is having a UI text field. We're going to implement text, we'll place it in our UI text field and press our done button on our keyboard. Once we press our done button, that's simply going to place text within our first label. Now we've already talked about this, placing text from our text field into our label. So we're going to go over this kind of section pretty quick. So we're just setting this up to allow us to give us some functionality before we can use our if statements. So we got our text field in. I'm now going to place in our label, center that text, and just make it large enough so we can clearly see it. Okay, so I'm now going to quickly create the action and outlets that we need for us to perform the function of displaying text within our label before we move on to our if statements. So we select our files owner, bring up the assistant editor, now space out our outlet section and our action section. I'm going to start with our text field, so drag and drop that in. And I simply call it text field. Same goes for our label. I'll simply call it label. And then finally, we need to add an action to our text field to allow us to press the done button to place that text into our label from our text field. So select this action, make sure the event is editing did end, and I simply press this, I'll call this done button, because that's simply all it's going to be as our done button, and connect that in. Now, rather than going straight to our standard editor and jumping into our viewcontroller.swift, we're going to quickly configure this. So all it's going to do, again, is get the text from our text field, then place it into our label. So we get our label.text to equal our text field.text. Again, they're not text alignment, .text there. So it's just getting the text from our text field and adding that to the text of our label. Now, we've already covered this in our previous lectures upon displaying text and using UI text fields in our applications. So if you want to learn more about that in depth, just quickly go back to those lectures where you can learn more about it. And I'm going to close our assistant editor now and go back to our interface builder here. Select our UI text field here and then make sure we have the return key for done. Now, I'll quickly go to build and run just to test this functionality out so we know it works before we can actually move on and discuss and talk about our if statements. So we're going to select it on our remote here, and then we're just going to place in a couple of A's here, and then go down to our done button, enter that, and it displays in there. Perfect. Okay, so we now know that works. So we can now move on to our if statements. So how we're going to use our if statements is defining upon our label. Now, if our label equals a certain word, then our second label will display a certain piece of text. So, for example, if our label equals the word apples, then our second label will equal the word green, because the green is the colour of an apple. And then we can create another one for if our word equals banana, then the second statement will say yellow, because that's the colour of the banana. Now, this is the reason why we're adding in a UI text field, is so we can input this information ourselves. So again, it may sound a little bit confusing on how it works, but it's so simple and easy to understand when we come to code it. So before we get onto that, we need to design the rest of the interface. So this is our button, and I'll simply name it if. We're going to copy and paste our label in there and place it underneath, as this will be the one that changes depending on what our first label equals. Okay, so again, click the files owner, bring up our assistant editor, and now we're going to add the action and outlets for our two new objects. So our second label, which I'll just simply name it label2, and our if button, which I'll name this if button, making sure that is an action and it is primary action triggered. Connect that in. Okay, so we've got those two in. We'll close the assistant editor and then jump into our view controller.swift. Right then, so I space this out and we can write our first if statement. So again, we're going to be working off what our first label equals. So if our first label equals the word apples, then when we press our button, if it equals that, it's going to then display green, because that's the colour of an apple, in our second label. So that's kind of how an if statement works. Depending on the kind of state or the state of a current object, we can perform actions on it. So we go if our label.text is equal, two equals there. So if it's equal to the text in our string apples, and we create our parentheses bracket there. So if our label.text is equal to apples, then perform whatever code has been placed within these two parentheses is here. And what we're going to have is label2 dot text to equal green. There we go. So as you can see there, so if our label text equals, because we have to make sure it equals that string, so rather than the equaling the 1, it's got to equal while it's currently equaling to apples, then perform label2 will equal green. So that's all that simply is going to happen there. That's our if statement. So it defines what's happening through the state of an object. So if we test it by build and run before we take it a step further. Now if we type in our apples in here, now it is case sensitive, as you can see there, I put a capital on the A there. So we need to make sure that we add that in. So we go along to the capitalization section on the keyboard here, and then we add that in. And then go all the way to our A. Ooh. There we go, so we add in apples, and we enter that in, so it displays it in our first label. Then we go on to press our button, our if statement. And again, if the label 1 equals apples, then it can display the word green in our second one. So if I go to press it, and you see our second label displays green. Now to show you that it's not just equaling green because we set it in the code, we're going to rebuild the project so our second label is then blank and nice and clear. And within the text field, we'll just simply write banana. And again, we don't have any if statement or any configuration for if it equals that. And we go to press our if button, nothing's going to happen because we don't have anything set up other than if our first label equals apples. Now let's create a second if statement. For this time, if it equals our label dot text equals, let's say banana, then perform our label2 dot text to equal yellow, because again that's the colour of a banana. So it only can perform these two statements, these two if statements, if the first label either displays the word apples or banana. So again, we go to build and run. And within the simulator here, we bring up our keyboard here. And again, we need to go to our capitalization section. So we select that. And we'll start with apples again, just to show you how it works. So apples, add that in, press our if statement. And because it equals apples, it displays green. So now we change it to banana. So we're going to get rid of everything that's being displayed in there. And then go to banana, capitalization on the B. Ooh. Let's do that again, press the wrong button. So capitalization on the B. There we go. And then finally done. Add that into our first label. Now because we again have an if statement for it, if it equals banana, that when we go to press our if statement, it displays yellow. Now these are great. So again, you can equal something depending on the state of something else. For example, if you were creating a game, you would do if user has completed level 1, then unlock level 2. That's simply how you would use if statements. But there's other ways you can do it. It doesn't just have to define if it equals this, do this. How do you do it if it equals apples, then display green? But what if it doesn't equal apples? Can we create an action for that? Well, it's pretty simple. So let's go for apples as the test one. So space it out so you can clearly see it. So if it equals apples, display green. And what we can do if it doesn't equal apples, we can do an else statement. Else, if it doesn't equal apples, we create another set of parentheses brackets there. And within this, we can get our label .text here to simply equal does not say, let's say it does not say apples. So this time, if label.text equals apples, then display green in the second label. Else, which the only other option for else is it does not equal apples, display in label 2 does not say apples. So if you go to build and run, and we can test it out. So if I'm within it, again, we'll quickly display that it is working for apples, and then we've added the else on it. So select it there, go to Apple for the A. Again, so if it equals apples, it's going to display green. Else, if it doesn't equal apples, which is going to equal apple this time, we press it, and it does not say apples. And this is because if it equals apples, then say green. Else, if it does not equal apples, which the only other option is the else statement here, does not say apples. And we'll then finally go on to our banana one. We go to our capitalization here, and we go to our B. So banana, press done, and go to our if statement here, which says yellow. So it's reading both if statements. So if we go to our Xcode again, so if it equals apples, perform this task, which it don't equal apples, and then it will perform does not say apples, but it also reads this one. For if our label.text equals banana, which it did the second time round, or the third time round should I say, it then equals our label to say yellow. So there we go, that's simply how we can use if statements to define a current state of an object within our application and perform tasks upon it. Even if it doesn't equal that state, we can then still do a task or trigger an action to happen with the else statement within it. So again, it's useful again for if your user, you got a game and your user completes a level, you need to unlock level 1. For if user has completed level 1, then unlock level 2, else make them restart level 1. It's simple at fact like that. Or if your user has, a life left, then restart the game, allow them to play where they left off, else it's game over. That's simply how if statements works. They're a big crucial part of application development. And we're going to be using if statements quite a lot throughout the duration of this course, whether it be in our games or just mini sections of the course creating mini functions. And to showcase this, we're going to be creating countdown timers in our next lecture. We're going to be using if statements to control how they work.